The mansion stretched across the hillside like a fortress of glass and marble, gleaming under the early morning sun. Silver sports cars lined the circular driveway, their polished surfaces reflecting the towering white pillars that framed the front entrance. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and rich leather, a luxury perfume of wealth that seemed to swallow all other scents. But in one sunlit room, the quietest sound was a small sigh, barely audible over the hum of the central air. Amelia Carlyle, the billionaire's only daughter, sat cross-legged on a plush cream rug, her small fingers tracing the patterns of a Persian carpet with intricate care. Her hazel eyes, sharp and observant, darted to the grand windows overlooking the sprawling gardens. Birds chirped somewhere in the distance, their melodies bouncing off marble walls. Yet Amelia didn't reach out to them. She didn't wave, didn't speak. She just watched, silently. To anyone else, it might have looked like a peaceful moment, a child lost in thought. But those who knew Amelia's story would understand the weight behind the stillness. From the moment she was born, doctors had warned her parents that she might never speak, that words could always remain beyond her reach. They used the words autistic and non-verbal with clinical detachment, as though diagnosing a machine rather than a child. Her father, Andrew Carlyle, was a man who had built an empire from nothing. He had conquered markets, amassed billions, and even tamed boardrooms filled with men and women who were sharper, smarter, and faster than him. But Amelia was a mystery he couldn't solve. No number of consultants, no amount of money, no technological gadget could coax a word from her lips. "Have you tried the speech therapist again?" a voice asked. Andrew turned from the floor-to-ceiling windows, his tailored suit impeccably pressed, his tie a brilliant flash of gold against the stark white of his shirt. "Yes," he said, a hint of frustration sharpening his tone. "She refuses every time. It's like she doesn't even hear me." His assistant, a young woman with a clipboard and a nervous smile, glanced at Amelia, who continued tracing her carpet pattern without acknowledging the conversation. "Maybe she needs more time," the assistant suggested cautiously. "Time?" Andrew scoffed, walking toward the grand staircase. "We have money, resources, the best specialists in the country. She has everything, and yet nothing works. She's trapped in this silence, and I can't—" He broke off, running a hand through his dark hair, his jaw tightening. The anger wasn't loud, but it radiated from him like heat from a furnace. Amelia, small and seemingly fragile, remained unchanged. Her silence was a mirror reflecting the frustration of the adults around her, a mirror that no one wanted to look at for too long. Her mother, Lillian Carlyle, stepped softly into the room, her designer heels barely making a sound on the marble floor. She wore a calming smile, one practiced over years of social events, gala dinners, and business dinners with the world's wealthiest individuals. Yet even she couldn't disguise the exhaustion in her eyes. "She's different," Lillian said, her voice gentle. "Not broken, just different," Andrew shook his head. "Different doesn't mean she can't. She should be able to communicate, Lillian. She should be able to—" He paused, running his hands down his face. I don't know what else to do." In the corner of the room, a small mechanical robot designed to engage children with autism sat idle, its lights flickering softly. Amelia didn't look at it. She didn't look at any of the toys scattered around the room. She just sat, observing, waiting, thinking. Or maybe not thinking in the way her parents wanted her to. Outside, the wind stirred the garden hedges, carrying the scent of roses and freshly trimmed grass into the room. Amelia reached out, brushing her fingers along the edge of the window pane. The glass was cold beneath her touch, and she pulled back quickly, almost startled by the sensation. Yet in that small, fleeting moment, she was alive in her own way, a life entirely separate from the wealth, the frustration, and the expectation surrounding her. Andrew's phone buzzed, pulling him out of the moment. He glanced at the screen, sighed, and then strode toward his study. Meetings, calls, deals that could shift markets. But Amelia was untouched by all of it. She remained in her world, a silent observer of a life she didn't choose and couldn't yet influence. The staff whispered in the hallways. "She doesn't talk. She doesn't play, and she just sits there." Some felt pity, some discomfort, some a strange fear they couldn't name. For the wealthy, silence could be more terrifying than anger. Silence was unknown, and the unknown was uncontrollable. In the midst of this meticulously curated household, Amelia's silence was a rebellion, though it wasn't conscious. It was simply who she was. And for a man like Andrew Carlyle, used to commanding results and bending reality to his will, it was a puzzle that gnawed at him day and night. That evening, Andrew sat in his study, overlooking the city skyline that sparkled like scattered diamonds. The hum of wealth, the promise of power, the clink of glasses in high-rise buildings, it all felt meaningless compared to the emptiness he saw in Amelia's eyes. "She'll never speak," he muttered, almost to himself. "No one can reach her." But as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast golden streaks across the marble floors of the mansion, no one noticed the small figure in the corner, her fingers tracing shapes in the air, her eyes flickering with thought. Amelia's silence wasn't absence. It was waiting for someone, something, anyone, who could see her not as a problem to fix, but as a person to understand. And unknown to anyone in that house, that someone was about to arrive. The morning sun spilled gold across the Carlyle estate, lighting up every corner of the mansion's gleaming corridors. Birds sang with careless joy, unaware of the tension inside the walls of the grand house. Amelia sat in her usual spot on the cream rug, fingers tracing invisible shapes on the floor, eyes fixed on the window. Her world was quiet, too quiet for the chaos swirling in the lives of those around her. Today, something was different. There was a subtle shift in the air, a whisper of change, carried on the soft breeze through the open doors. The doorbell rang, a crisp chime echoing through the cavernous hallways. It was a sound Amelia could hear but had long learned to ignore. Others, however, rushed to respond with brisk professionalism. Lillian Carlyle answered, her composed face masking curiosity. Standing on the marble foyer was a young woman, no older than 24, with a gentle smile and eyes that seemed to see past the grand opulence into something real. Her name was Clara, and she carried a single worn leather bag slung over her shoulder. "I'm here for Amelia," Clara said softly, her voice carrying calm authority. She didn't announce herself like a guest at a gala. She didn't mention credentials, awards, or experience. She simply said the child's name, and in that moment it was enough. Andrew Carlyle, who had been reviewing contracts in the study, was called down. He met Clara at the foyer, his posture stiff, his expression unreadable. Wealth had taught him to judge people at a glance, to weigh the potential they carried before trusting them. But something about Clara, perhaps her quiet confidence, perhaps the calm in her eyes, made him pause. "Are you qualified?" he asked, his tone clipped. "I am," Clara replied, keeping her gaze steady. "But more importantly, I want to understand her." Andrew frowned. Understanding had been in short supply at home. Doctors, therapists, tutors, none had achieved it. The previous caregivers had either quit or been dismissed, frustrated by Amelia's silence. Yet something in Clara's presence was different. It was not force, not urgency. It was patience. Lillian looked between the two adults, a spark of hope lighting her otherwise tired expression. "Let's bring her in," she said, her voice almost a whisper. Amelia noticed the new figure immediately. Clara moved slowly into the room, kneeling down on the rug, keeping her distance but lowering herself to Amelia's level. She didn't reach for the child, didn't make sudden gestures or overwhelming movements. Instead, she simply sat, arms relaxed, eyes focused. For Amelia, this was unusual. Adults normally filled the space with noise, commands, or expectations. But Clara offered nothing but presence, and for the first time in a long time, Amelia's fingers paused. Her hazel eyes flickered with interest. "I'm Clara," the young woman said, in a tone that was neither demanding nor pleading. "I'm here for you. Can we spend some time together?" Amelia tilted her head slightly, unsure. This was new. It was gentle. It was inviting. She had never been approached like this before. Days passed, and Clara returned every morning, always in the same calm, unhurried way. She observed Amelia without forcing interaction. She learned the rhythms of the child's silence, the subtle cues in her gestures, the small patterns of expression that hinted at thought and understanding. One morning, Clara noticed Amelia arranging blocks on the rug in precise sequences, each color placed with meticulous care. Instead of instructing her to speak or play, Clara mirrored the sequence with her own hands, creating a silent conversation. Amelia's fingers froze mid-arrangement, then slowly, almost imperceptibly, reached for Clara's blocks. Their silent communication blossomed over days. Meanwhile, Andrew watched with skepticism. "She's not speaking," he complained one evening to Lillian, pacing in the study. "We pay hundreds of thousands for specialists, and this girl, this nanny, sits and plays blocks, and you say progress is being made?" Lillian's eyes softened. "Progress doesn't always look like words, Andrew. Sometimes it's patience. Sometimes it's understanding." But Andrew's doubts weren't without reason. Amelia had been tested, prodded, and pushed for years. Yet with Clara, there was no pressure. There were no charts, no sessions, no high-stakes interventions. There was simply presence, and it was unsettling. Because slowly, quietly, the impossible began to happen. Amelia's eyes started following Clara's movements. She began to respond to subtle gestures, nodding once here, tilting her head there. She initiated contact in tiny ways. A hand touch, a shared glance, a moment of laughter that no one in the Carlyle household had ever seen. Each interaction was small, but to Clara it was monumental. One afternoon, Clara brought a small sketchbook. She didn't demand Amelia draw. She simply sketched herself and placed the book beside the child. Amelia, curious, picked up a pencil. At first, her lines were hesitant, shaky, almost invisible. But soon shapes emerged. Triangles, squares, a rough house, and finally, a figure that vaguely resembled Clara. Amelia handed the book to Clara, who smiled warmly. "You drew me," Clara whispered. "I like it." And then just a faint, almost accidental sound escaped Amelia's lips. A tiny, breathy, It wasn't clear, it wasn't perfect, but it was a sound. The first sound in years. Andrew, who had entered silently behind Clara, froze. His breath caught. Did she just... Clara held up a finger to hush him, her focus unwavering on Amelia. The child looked at her, wide-eyed, a mixture of fear and wonder dancing in her expression. And then she did it again. A tentative, The household, accustomed to silence, was shaken to its core. The impossible had happened. Not through force, not through wealth, not through pressure, but through attention, understanding, and patience. Amelia had found a bridge, and Clara had built it. That evening, Andrew paced in the study, running his hands through his hair. "I don't understand," he muttered. "Years of money, years of specialists, and a young nanny just talks to her? Plays blocks?" Lillian smiled softly, observing the father she loved and the daughter he had long feared lost. "Sometimes, Andrew," she said, "it's not about what you do for them. It's about how you see them." Clara sees Amelia, and for Amelia, the world, once a silent cage, had begun to open. The mansion seemed quieter than usual that morning, though the sun poured in through the towering windows, filling the rooms with light. Amelia sat cross-legged on the cream rug, her small hands clutching a soft toy bear. The world around her had always been loud, confusing and overwhelming, but now with Clara, it felt like it might finally make sense. Clara entered the room, carrying a basket of colored scarves. She knelt gently beside Amelia, offering a calm smile. "Good morning," she said softly. "Do you want to play a game with me today?" Amelia's eyes flickered toward Clara. There was curiosity there now, a spark that hadn't existed before. She didn't answer with words, not yet, but she reached out for the red scarf. That single gesture was more than a movement. It was the first thread of connection being woven between them. The game was simple. Clara waved the scarves in patterns, encouraging Amelia to copy. Red followed blue, blue followed yellow. Amelia hesitated at first, unsure, then slowly mimicked Clara's movements. Her fingers trembled, but they followed. Each repetition became easier, each movement more confident. Andrew watched from the doorway, arms crossed, brow furrowed. He didn't understand what he was seeing. A game? A scarf? How could this simple, childish play be progress? Yet he could not deny the small miracle. Amelia's eyes were brighter, her movements more deliberate, her mind reaching outward for the first time in years. Clara noticed the change immediately. "You're very good at this," she whispered. "I see you, Amelia." It was a phrase Amelia had never heard spoken so directly. Someone seeing her, not just noticing her existence, but truly seeing her. She tilted her head, a soft hum escaping her lips. It was not a word, but it was intentional, an effort at communication. Clara's heart lifted. She had learned to recognize these small sounds as the prelude to language. Days turned into weeks, and the rituals deepened. Clara brought books, puzzles, musical instruments, and even a small chalkboard. Amelia responded in her own ways, pointing, drawing, humming. Slowly, tiny syllables began to form. They were fragments, hesitant, imperfect, but they were voices breaking through the silence. Meanwhile, tension in the house began to rise. Andrew, a man used to control, struggled to understand this new dynamic. His daughter, whom he had thought unreachable, was beginning to communicate in ways he had never anticipated. One evening, he confronted Clara in the study. "I don't understand," he said sharply. "She hasn't spoken a full word in years. You come in here and suddenly she's making sounds? It's unnatural." Clara remained calm, her eyes steady. "She's not speaking full words yet," she said softly. "She's building trust. She's finding her voice in her own time." "I'm just listening." Andrew's frustration boiled over. "Years of specialists, therapy, tutors, and you're just playing games?" Clara shook her head, almost smiling. "I'm not playing. I'm learning. I'm giving her the space to speak when she's ready." And slowly, Andrew began to understand. It wasn't about techniques or schedules. It was about connection. Amelia needed someone who could see her without judgment, who could hear the sounds she was brave enough to make, who could respond with patience rather than expectation. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. It was a rainy afternoon. The sky was gray, the windows streaked with droplets. Amelia sat at the piano, a small instrument Clara had brought in. Her fingers hovered above the keys, unsure. Clara knelt beside her, gently guiding her hand to the right position. "Can you try?" Clara asked softly. Amelia looked at her, eyes wide with hesitation. Then slowly she pressed a key. A soft note filled the room. She pressed another, and then another. "Beautiful," Clara whispered. "You're making music." Something shifted in Amelia. She looked at Clara, her lips parting, and for the first time, a clear, audible word came out. Clara. The name hung in the air, trembling, fragile, but unmistakable. Andrew, who had been standing silently behind them, felt his chest tighten. His daughter had spoken, truly spoken, for the first time in her life. Lillian rushed into the room, tears streaming down her face. "She said your name," she exclaimed. Clara smiled, tears in her own eyes. "She's ready," she said gently. "She's ready to speak now." From that day on, Amelia's world began to open like a flower in spring. Words came slowly at first, halting and unsure, but each one was a triumph. Each syllable was a victory against years of silence. The household, once tense and distant, began to change. Andrew learned to listen. Lillian learned to let go of expectations and celebrate small victories. And Amelia. Amelia began to find her voice, a voice that had been waiting patiently for someone to hear it. By the end of the chapter, the Carlisle mansion was no longer a house of silence and frustration. It had become a place of possibility, of hope, and of wonder. Amelia had found her bridge to the world, and Clara had built it, one gentle, deliberate step at a time. The Carlisle mansion was alive with quiet tension that morning. Amelia's first word had ignited hope, but it had also sparked unease. Not everyone in the household was ready for this change. Lillian flitted from room to room, anxious yet excited, while Andrew sat in the study, brows furrowed, scrolling through reports on his tablet. He tried to focus, but his mind kept drifting back to the living room. Amelia had said Clara, just one word, yet it had altered everything. It was Lillian who first sensed the brewing storm. "Andrew," she whispered, her voice tight with worry. "I think we need to talk." "About Clara." Andrew didn't look up. "About what?" "She's doing her job. She's helping Amelia." "Helping?" Lillian's whisper turned sharper. Do you realize what's happening? Amelia is starting to speak because of her. Not therapy, not specialists, but her. What if this changes her? Personality, her routines, her world? Andrew finally looked up, startled by the intensity. Lillian, she's your daughter. You've seen what this woman has done. You think I don't notice it? Amelia has spoken one word in years, and it's because Clara took the time to. Lillian cut him off, eyes flashing. She's not a professional. She's young, untested, meddling. What if Amelia becomes dependent on her? What if she manipulates her? Andrew ran a hand over his face. The room seemed to shrink around them. Their voices, usually polite and calculated, were raw with fear and frustration. Manipulates her? He asked slowly. Lillian, she's the first person to reach Amelia in years. She's the first person Amelia trusts. That's not manipulation, that's love, care, connection. Lillian shook her head. And what about the family? What about me? Amelia is my daughter. I should be the one guiding her, protecting her. And now this stranger has all this influence? Andrew leaned back, his voice lowering. Do you honestly think Amelia's progress comes from control? From schedules? From lectures? You've tried everything for years, Lillian. Every specialist, every method, and she barely responds. Clara listened. Clara understood. That's why Amelia is speaking. Not because she's manipulating her, but because she's human enough to reach her heart. Lillian's chest rose and fell. She wanted to scream, to accuse, to reject, but deep down, a tiny part of her knew Andrew was right. She had tried to mold Amelia into a version of herself, a version that fit her expectations, but Amelia was not a puzzle to be solved. She was a person, complex, brilliant, and fragile, and Clara had seen that. The confrontation did not end there. It spilled into the living room, where Amelia sat quietly, unaware of the storm surrounding her. Clara approached her gently, kneeling to meet her eyes. Amelia, she whispered, it's okay. You're safe. Amelia's fingers clutched her toy bear. She glanced between her parents, sensing their anger and fear, and then to Clara. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating, but she didn't cry. She didn't retreat. Instead, she made a sound, a small, deliberate hum, and reached for Clara's hand. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment, it carried the weight of defiance and courage. Amelia was saying in her own way that she had a choice, and that choice was to trust Clara. Andrew softened, finally. He looked at Lillian, who still struggled with her feelings. Look at her, he said quietly. She's scared, yes. Confused, yes. But she's also brave. She's choosing connection over fear. Isn't that what we want for her? Lillian's eyes welled up. But she's still so fragile. She's always been fragile, Andrew replied, placing a hand on hers. But she's also strong, stronger than we realize, and Clara is helping her see that strength. For the first time in weeks, the room was quiet. Tension lingered, but it had shifted. Instead of anger, there was understanding, tentative, cautious, but present. Amelia, sensing the change, leaned closer to Clara, whispering her first real sentence. Clara. Stay. It was a turning point. Not only had Amelia begun to speak, but she had expressed a desire, a preference, a will. It was no longer about therapy or games. It was about trust, love, and the formation of her own agency. In the following days, Clara became more than a nanny. She became a bridge between Amelia and the world, between parents and daughter, between fear and courage. And the household, once a place of tension and unspoken rules, began to transform. Yet the chapter closed with a hint of looming challenge. Outside the mansion, whispers of gossip reached the ears of the Carlyle family. Neighbors and distant relatives questioned the propriety of a young nanny wielding such influence over a billionaire's child. Social media, ever hungry for scandal, began to speculate. Clara's motives would soon be tested, not just by the family, but by the world, and Amelia. Amelia's voice, fragile yet growing, would have to navigate both love and scrutiny. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Carlyle mansion, but inside a storm was brewing, not of weather, but of scrutiny. Social media had already caught wind of Amelia's newfound voice. A single post showing Clara kneeling by Amelia's side with the caption, "The nanny who unlocked her voice," had gone viral. Comments ranged from awe and praise to skepticism and outright judgment. Andrew scrolled through the notifications, tension creasing his face. Lillian hovered nearby, her fingers nervously tapping the marble countertop. "Andrew, this is getting out of hand," she said. "People are talking. Relatives are asking questions. Reporters are circling. Clara, she's too young, too inexperienced. What if this blows up in our faces?" Andrew didn't respond immediately. He watched Amelia at the far end of the room, happily stacking blocks with a newfound confidence. Each word she spoke was deliberate, yet playful. "Mama," she said, pointing to Lillian, then Clara, with a bright smile. Her ability to choose, to communicate, to assert herself, those small steps, was revolutionary. Andrew finally looked at Lillian. "Do you see her? She's thriving. And yes, Clara is young. But experience isn't always what matters. Empathy, patience, understanding, that's what Amelia needed. And Clara gave her that. But outside the mansion walls, not everyone shared that perspective." The Carlyle name carried weight, and any hint of scandal was amplified tenfold. By noon, reporters had gathered near the gates, cameras poised. The internet buzzed with speculation. Is the billionaire letting a young nanny raise his child? "Well, what does this say about the family? Is this professional negligence?" Clara, sensing the tension, knelt beside Amelia, brushing her hair back gently. "Don't worry, Amelia. No matter what they say, we know the truth." "You're amazing," Amelia's eyes sparkled. She reached out and held Clara's hand, whispering, "Clara." Brave. It was a simple sentence, yet it carried weight. Courage, affirmation, and a bond stronger than any external judgment. Andrew knew they couldn't hide forever. They had to confront the scrutiny, and he decided that they would do it on their own terms. That afternoon, a press conference was arranged in the mansion's grand hall. The media buzzed, flashbulbs firing as Andrew, Lillian, Clara, and Amelia stepped forward. "Good afternoon," Andrew began, his voice calm yet commanding. "I want to address the recent attention on our family, specifically regarding my daughter Amelia and her progress." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Amelia has faced challenges from birth. She is autistic and was born unable to speak. For years we tried every method, every specialist, every therapy. And then Clara joined our family." He glanced at Clara, who gave a small nod, encouraging Amelia to step forward. The room went silent, waiting for what would happen next. Amelia, with Clara's guidance, took a deep breath. "I speak," she said. The words were soft, but the cameras caught them. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. She took another step forward, eyes bright. "Clara." "Help!" The media erupted into questions, but Andrew raised a hand. "Wait, this is not a story of scandal. It is a story of love, patience, and understanding." Clara did not unlock Amelia as a gimmick. She saw Amelia as a person, listened to her, and gave her the courage to speak. That is all. Lillian, standing beside him, felt a surge of pride and relief. Her daughter was no longer silent. She had a voice, and that voice, though fragile, was strong enough to confront the world. But the challenge didn't end there. Social media and influential critics were relentless. Opinion pieces debated the ethics of a young nanny having such influence. Parenting forums exploded with analysis and judgment. The Carlyle family faced a choice: retreat from public view or embrace the story fully, showing the world that love and trust transcended social expectations. They chose the latter. Over the following weeks, Clara became more than a caretaker. She became a symbol, a reminder that breakthroughs often come from unexpected places. Amelia's voice grew stronger, and so did her confidence. She spoke words and sentences, began expressing preferences, and even shared small jokes. The public, initially skeptical, started to cheer. Social media, once a threat, became an ally. Clips of Amelia saying, "Clara, help play," or laughing with her parents went viral for the right reasons. Yet, as their story gained traction, subtle challenges appeared. Relatives questioned decisions in interviews. Specialists doubted methods. Competitors sought to twist the narrative, but the Carlyle family, united, held firm. They had learned that courage and conviction, when rooted in love, could withstand scrutiny. In quiet moments, Andrew and Lillian would watch Amelia and Clara together, marveling at the transformation. Andrew would often whisper, "She's speaking. Not because of us, not because of the world, but because she feels safe." That's the real miracle, And Amelia? She was no longer just a silent child in a grand mansion. She was a girl with agency, with choices, with laughter and words. She had faced judgment, fear, and uncertainty, and emerged brave, with Clara by her side. As night fell, the mansion glowed softly. Amelia cuddled her bear, whispering to Clara, "Tomorrow. Play again?" Clara smiled. "Yes, Amelia. Tomorrow we play again." It was a small promise, but in it lay the essence of the story: trust, love, resilience. Outside, the world continued to watch, to judge, and to speculate. But inside, a child had found her voice. A nanny had proven her worth, and a family had learned that sometimes the heart's guidance surpasses all rules. The morning air was crisp, and the grand hall of the Carlisle mansion felt unusually tense. Today was not a casual day of play or quiet practice. It was the day Amelia would face the world outside her home for the first time since finding her voice. Andrew, usually composed, paced the marble floors, checking his watch for the third time in as many minutes. Lillian sat nearby, hands clasped tightly in her lap, glancing at Clara, who was gently brushing Amelia's hair. The little girl, usually full of boundless energy, seemed unusually quiet. She clutched her favorite stuffed bear, whispering, "Clara." Nervous, Clara smiled reassuringly. "It's okay, Amelia. Feeling nervous means you're brave, and you're ready." Today's event was a charity gala hosted by a prominent philanthropic foundation, attended by society elites, press, and even a few of Andrew's business rivals. The purpose: to present Amelia's story of resilience, her breakthrough in communication, and to raise awareness for children with similar challenges. But for Amelia, it was more than awareness. It was a test of courage, confidence, and trust in Clara. As the limousine rolled up the mansion driveway, Amelia peeked out the window. The bustling city beyond the gates looked like a vast, unpredictable jungle. The crowd outside was a blur of cameras, reporters, and flashing lights. "Big outside," she murmured. "Yes, big," Clara said gently, holding her hand. "But you're not alone. I'm with you." Andrew opened the car door and Amelia stepped out, the weight of dozens of eyes pressing down on her small shoulders. The flash of cameras startled her, and she instinctively held Clara's hand tighter. Lillian followed, exuding calm reassurance, but even she couldn't hide the tightness in her chest. Inside the gala hall, the lights were dazzling, the chatter overwhelming. Volunteers and guests smiled politely, but there was a palpable tension, the mix of curiosity, skepticism, and expectation. Amelia's usual playful confidence was muted. Her small voice trembled as she whispered, "Clara." "Scary." Clara knelt down, meeting her gaze. "I know it feels scary, Amelia. But remember all the times you spoke here at home. This is just the next step. You can do it." The program began. Andrew took the stage first, delivering a brief, eloquent introduction about Amelia's journey. Then came the moment that would truly test the little girl. Amelia was invited to speak in front of hundreds of attendees, recounting her experience and showing the world the power of patience, love, and understanding. The room went silent as Amelia stepped forward, supported by Clara. Her tiny hands trembled slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hi, I speak now," she said. A few attendees murmured in surprise. Some smiled warmly. But then came the challenge, her first question from a prominent board member. "And Amelia," the woman asked gently, "what was the hardest part of not being able to speak?" Amelia froze. The weight of dozens of eyes, cameras, and microphones pressed down on her. The crowd leaned in, expecting words, expecting a demonstration of her progress. Tears pricked her eyes. She shook slightly, unsure if she could do it. Clara knelt beside her, whispering softly, "Remember. Breathe, I'm here." "You can do it," the little girl inhaled deeply, recalling months of practice, every small victory, every moment Clara had patiently coaxed words from her lips. Then she spoke, her voice trembling but clear. "Not." "Understood, alone, scared." A ripple of emotion spread through the room. Some gasped. Others had tears glistening. The simplicity of her words, the honesty, struck a chord deeper than any polished speech could. Amelia paused, looked at Clara, then continued, "Clara, Help! Brave. The crowd erupted, not in mockery, not in doubt, but in applause. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing the bravery of a small girl who had faced fear head-on. But the challenge wasn't over. Next came the Q&A portion, and reporters, curious and sometimes cruel, asked rapid-fire questions. How do you communicate now? Do you enjoy speaking? Does Clara always guide you? Amelia's answers were small, deliberate, and thoughtful. Words help. Play. Fun. Clara. Good. Each response grew in confidence, each word a victory over fear and judgment. Andrew watched, pride swelling, but also concern. Every word Amelia spoke was a triumph, yet he knew the world could be unforgiving. One wrong interpretation, one negative headline, could undo months of progress. Lillian, sensing his worry, whispered, "Let her shine. She's ready." By the end of the event, Amelia had won over the audience. Elite philanthropists approached her and Clara, offering support for autism programs and early intervention initiatives. Social media buzzed with videos of her bravery, calling her the little voice of courage. Even Andrew's rivals nodded in silent respect, recognizing that the girl's achievement was not just personal but transformative. After the gala, back in the quiet of the limousine, Amelia rested her head on Clara's shoulder. Scary. Big, but happy, she murmured. Clara smiled, brushing her hair back. Yes, Amelia. You were very brave today. Very brave. Andrew and Lillian exchanged glances. They had witnessed not just Amelia's public triumph, but the transformation of the entire family unit. Clara's unwavering guidance had catalyzed a breakthrough that no amount of money, prestige, or expertise could replicate. That night, as the mansion settled into silence, Andrew reflected on the journey. From the uncertainty of Amelia's early years, the trials of communication therapy, to the trials of public scrutiny, the family had emerged stronger. They had faced the ultimate test, not of wealth, influence, or social standing, but of courage, trust, and unconditional love. And Amelia? She had learned that her voice mattered, that fear could be faced, that love and patience could make the impossible possible. She had spoken her truth, touched hearts, and shown the world that sometimes the smallest voices can create the biggest impact. As she drifted to sleep, holding Clara's hand, she whispered, "Tomorrow." Brave again? Clara kissed her forehead. Yes, Amelia. Tomorrow, we are brave again. And in that promise lay the heart of their story. Courage nurtured by love, trust strengthened through patience, and a family forever transformed by the simple, profound power of being heard. The Carlisle mansion glowed warmly in the late afternoon sun, casting long shadows across the manicured gardens. Amelia sat on the soft rug in the playroom, her tiny fingers tracing the edges of her favorite picture book. But she wasn't alone. Clara knelt beside her, guiding her hands gently, just as she had for months. This time, though, Amelia spoke freely, without hesitation. "Clara, read story," she said, her voice clear, confident, and steady. The words felt different, weighty with victory, soft with joy, and brimming with independence. Andrew and Lillian watched from the doorway, emotions swirling in silence. Pride, relief, and awe all mixed together as they saw their daughter fully emerge from her world of silence. Amelia was no longer the fragile, unsure child she had been. She was a bright, determined girl whose courage had shattered the limits imposed on her by circumstance. In the weeks following the gala, the world had taken notice. Philanthropists, educators, and families reached out, inspired by Amelia's journey. But for the Carlisle family, the real triumph was quieter, more intimate. It wasn't in the applause, the headlines, or the viral videos. It was in the everyday moments, laughter at breakfast, whispered secrets at bedtime, and the simple joy of being understood. One evening, as the family sat together by the fireplace, Amelia spoke without prompting. "Family. Happy." Her words were small yet monumental. Clara smiled, brushing Amelia's hair back, and Andrew felt tears sting his eyes. Lillian reached out to hold both their hands, and for the first time in a long while, the mansion was filled with a complete sense of peace. The journey had been long and fraught with uncertainty, But in the end, love had guided the way. Clara's patience had unlocked a voice, Andrew's dedication had provided a safe space, and Amelia's bravery had proven that even the smallest voices can echo the loudest. As the night deepened, Amelia curled up beside Clara, whispering softly, "Tomorrow." "More words?" Clara kissed her forehead. "Yes, Amelia. Tomorrow, and every day after that." And in that promise lay the enduring truth of their story. With love, courage, and unwavering belief, even the quietest voice could be heard, change hearts, and inspire the world. The camera of life might have once overlooked her, but Amelia's voice now resonated beyond the walls of the mansion, forever echoing as a testament to perseverance, compassion, and the miraculous power of being understood.